And I think as human beings, we can be very sensitive. I certainly am somewhat of a very sensitive person. And so I can remember when times my feelings have been hurt or looked the wrong way, and how easily it is to hold some grudges and resentment. I like to joke around that I've kept a big book all my life in very small print of everyone who has messed me over. It's a very big book. I think maybe many of us can relate to that. We're humans. But how do we begin to make peace? Peace with ourselves. This is truly, and I mean this very sincerely, one of my deepest aspirations is by the time I'm on my deathbed, that I will have made peace with myself, others, and the world. And because of that aspiration, it reveals to me the deep inner work that I need to do to make peace. I have a mother-in-law, Charmaine is her name, and she's now passed on. But she was a very powerful teacher for me, my mother-in-law. She had no doubt a lot of joys of a lot of family and children and grandchildren. She was very, very loved because she was a very loving person. She'd often write, when she wrote birthday cards or holiday cards to us, she'd always sign her card with these few words. She'd always say, "You're special, love, Mom." That's just how she was. She always encouraged and let everyone know that everyone that was dear to her, they were special. What a beautiful legacy. You're special, love, Mom. And this mom, of course, had her own challenges in life. And at one time in her life, her husband, my wife's father, had left her, abandoned her, had an affair. It's a very painful situation. And yet I saw Charmaine. I saw that she never complained about this, was never resentful about this. I don't know how she got there. I don't think that she was a meditator. I don't know what she did, but my sense of her was she harbored not any resentment whatsoever to her ex-husband that had, I'm sure, caused some deep pain for her in the split up of a family. And not only did I not hear her have any resentment, but I also experienced her hoping that he was okay, that he was doing well. That was amazing to me, to be around a person with that type of heart. And I felt like I want to be like that. I want to be like that. So making peace to me is something so special. And I think that the practices of mindfulness can really be of great help in working towards that place of beginning to make peace. And what I've identified is three very powerful areas that one needs to work with in mindfulness practice to begin to make peace. The first one begins inside ourselves. Perhaps due to our conditioning, our upbringing, times where we were shamed, times we were made to feel small, times that we were humiliated, times where we got the message that I couldn't sing well, I'm not smart, you will not be successful. All these different messages at times that we might experience in life that created a sense of an identity that was self-diminishing, a sense of unworthiness. I remember one woman who I worked with some years ago in New Zealand taking a meditation retreat. She said about her mother that the only thing that she ever remembered about her mother saying to her is that I wish I never had you. That's a very extreme example. I wish I never had you. Can you imagine being brought up with a parent telling you that? This was, caused a deep, deep wound in her identity and felt such unworthiness. Yet during this retreat that we were practicing together, I was teaching, And I asked her, well, what type of work do you do? And she said, well, I'm a nurse midwife, and as it turns out, she has helped assist with the birth of probably over 1,000 babies in her professional career. And then she began to have this experience, maybe I am okay. and to begin this healing journey. But these woundedness happen early in lives where we begin to develop our sense of personality and identity, the sense of unworthiness. Will's father, John Kabat-Zinn, who's the founder of MBSR, and his wife, Will's mother, Mila, they wrote an exquisitely beautiful book about mindful parenting. It's called in English Everyday Blessings, The Art of Mindful Parenting. It's a beautiful book. And in this book, they speak about three very important areas in helping to raise your children. And the first two are very easy to understand, to accept them. And secondly, to have a lot of empathy and care for them. And the third is a word that I don't use that often, but the word is sovereignty. And what they mean by sovereignty is to honor your child's sovereign nature, to help them to grow up with greater confidence and flexibility. If the opposite happens, where we're not inspired to have confidence, where we're shamed and made to feel small, we grow up with a sense of becoming more neurotic and more confused. You know, it's interesting. My wife and I are very lucky. We live here in California, in Santa Cruz, and within our own little bubble of our family, we're keeping pretty safe with the pandemic. We don't go out very much other than just for walks and so forth. But we're very lucky that our son and our daughter-in-law are living here with us, and they just had a baby 6 weeks ago. So we're grandparents for the first time. So I'll show you later some pictures maybe. And I'm just so excited about being a grandfather. And also our younger son is here too. So like our whole family is together during this very incredible time. But one of the things that strikes me about so I'm around a baby that's now 6 weeks old. And it's amazing to be around a human being that has not been fully enmeshed in one's personality yet. No doubt that's going to happen. He's going to get his identity and his personality, and he'll go off and live his life. But for right now, like when the Kabat-Zinns, when they spoke about sovereignty, like right now, our grandson's name is Silas. He has no. He's so full of himself. Like he has no self-judgments. You know, for example, as we know with a baby, like he could be sitting right next to me in my arms and have a bowel movement right in front of all of you on Zoom. And he probably wouldn't even care less. And he could vomit, he could urinate, he could cry, he could laugh. Like the baby are just being baby. They haven't yet been shamed and humiliated and made to feel small. So there's a sense of a sovereignty that's so incredibly beautiful in infants. Maybe that's why we love them so much. They're just so much themselves. There's no shame. That comes later. But we can see the importance of how in these tender, if you do like a fruit or a plant, it's a tender little thing. We have to tend to it carefully and gently so it begins to go strong and gets confident. I remember growing up, an uncle used to make fun of me and call me a funny name when I would come over to my grandmother's house. And I remember at a certain point just feeling some shame. I didn't even want to go to my grandmother's house anymore. I just wanted to kind of hide. He thought it was funny, but it was a shaming experience. So the point that I want to make is that we are so impressionable when we're younger, and we don't. It was only till many years later that I realized with my uncle, wow, he was really saying some pretty mean things to me. And so we as children inadvertently at times may get shamed, may get to feel small. and begin to develop an identity where we're feeling um, a lot of self-hatred or lack of self-confidence or feeling of inadequacy or deficiency. We get shaped by our experience. And so what I want to get across is that one of the first parts in making peace is to begin to make peace with ourselves. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, he has a very powerful statement. He says, I can feed the hungry and forgive an insult. I can learn to love my enemies, and that these are great virtues. But what if I should discover that the poorest of the beggars and the most impudent of the offenders are all within me, and that I stand in the need of the alms of my own kindness? That I stand in the need of the alms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy who must be loved. That I myself am the enemy who must be loved. And sometimes we have such a negative opinion about ourselves. I remember once in a Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction class, a woman about my age, in her 60s, reported very painfully that she didn't remember one single day in her entire adult life where she didn't call herself um, a bad person. It was a swear word. I won't say the swear word, but it was pretty foul. And it was just kind of like, wow. Not a single day in her adult life she can't remember not calling herself this. Another person said, well, I don't call myself that, but I call myself stupid. Or I call myself ugly. Or I call myself an idiot. And like, it was just incredible, like, to go around the circle and to hear the amount of self-loathing that came. And the thing is that for all of us, we weren't born this way. This was learned. And we didn't know any better, because how could we have known any better? We're still young and forming our sense of identity and personality. The good news is what has been learned can be unlearned. And how it can be unlearned is by becoming mindful, becoming aware. Oh, look at this is what I do to myself once again. I've become an enemy to myself. And actually, if I told other people, talked to other people the way that I talk to myself, I might not even hardly have any friends. So this important journey of beginning to make peace with our own heart. And this comes about through mindfulness, in the sense that it's helping to see more clearly these places where we sabotage ourselves, where we, due to our conditioning, due to our upbringing, due to our narrative, our story, we get confined in the story and we don't see any other way. But with awareness, we begin, look at this, look at the way that I'm talking to myself right now. Would I talk like this to another person? Where did I learn this? And this was learned experience. But again, what can be learned can be unlearned as we wake up, as we begin to see through these stories that in some ways have enslaved us. So this journey of beginning to make peace to the times I've been hard on myself. So this involved a deep work of mindfulness and awareness to begin to acknowledge these narratives, these stories that I have identified with, and perhaps to discover that that's not all of me. There's more to me than just this. There's a poet from the Caribbean. It's called Love After Love. I'll just recite a couple of lines because it's a very beautiful thing about loving oneself. And it says that the time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door and in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome, and you will love again the stranger who is yourself. This is the beginning of making peace with ourselves. And yes, we all have had our conditioning and our stories. And these at times, if we're unaware, run our lives. And we don't notice anything new because we're so stuck in these identifications. And the gift of mindfulness is helping us to see these identifications. And because of that seeing and that knowing, we can begin to make some changes, particularly if some of these identifications are filled with self-loathing, self-hatred. We can begin, oh, here's a part that's wounded within me, and let me begin to heal myself. So, making peace to the times I've been hard on myself. And we'll do a guided meditation with this in a little bit as well. But the second area that I want to speak about is making peace or reconciling to those that I've hurt. This is a very humbling and a very sober practice for each and every one of us to acknowledge that there's been times due to one's own woundedness or not seeing clearly, or perhaps at times, of course, to protect ourselves, that we've hurt another. And to begin to make amends for the times perhaps that I haven't been so wise, that I've been impatient, times that because of my woundedness or my unawareness that I've caused pain to another, that I can begin this journey of making peace to anyone I've hurt in any way. There's a beautiful teaching within the mindfulness world, and it has a poetic name. It's called Becoming a Guardian of the World. And what that means is that when you recognize that you actually have caused some pain to another, and of course it's nice to be able to apologize if that's at all possible, and sometimes it may or may not be. But what's most important is not only to apologize if we've hurt another, but to make an intention strongly inside our own hearts that we try not to repeat that action that caused pain to another. In some ways, that's how we pay it back, by not doing it again as best we can, until we have amnesia and we forget, and there we are again. But can we make it a practice, once I recognize and understand perhaps pain that I've caused another, to not repeat it? Making peace to those I've hurt. And there's a very powerful story that I'll share with you about that. And I met this gentleman named Claude Shin Thomas quite a long time ago, maybe like 20 years ago. And he was giving a talk. He's a Zen Buddhist priest. And I went to his talk. I had never met him before. I didn't know what he was going to talk about, and I'll never forget what he shared. And what he shared was that in America he grew up in a kind of a poor family, and his father and grandfather were also involved in the military and in wars. And so this was during the Vietnam War, and so he decided to enlist into the army and be a soldier. And so he tells the story of him being very young and enlisting in the army and becoming a soldier. And he says, no, make no mistake, my job was to kill people. We were in the middle of a Vietnam War. And he said, I was really good at what I did. And there was rewards every time we went out on, he was a helicopter machine gunner. And every time they would go down on a mission, whoever got the most kills would get like a bag of heroin or a bag of marijuana or alcohol or some other type of drug, uppers and downers, whatever. And by the end of the war, he had won a lot of those bets. And he said by the end of the war, he had actually shot and killed over 350 men, women, and children, which is, I can't even comprehend something like that. At the end of the war, he was discharged. He lived out, he became a drug addict and lived homeless out in Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he was just, a drug addict and homeless and filled with post-traumatic stress disorder, though at the time didn't even know it. And there was a social worker that would come around with where all the homeless drug addicts were, and they would try to offer some resources for rehabilitation and to get them fed, try to help them in medical clinics and so forth. And there's this one particular social worker that kind of took to him and would come back to him and bring him food and try to help him to get into a rehab, but he would always just stay on the streets, crazed from what had happened in the war, using drugs, living homeless. But this social worker saw something in him and kept on coming back to him and bugging him. I want to help you. I want to help you. And it came time where there was this retreat that was happening. And she kept on bugging him. I want you to go to this retreat. I want you to go to this retreat. And so finally, after her bugging him so much, just so that she wouldn't bug him anymore, he finally said, okay, I'm going to go. Just because then this person wouldn't bug him anymore. And so he went, but he didn't even know where he was going, really. He was still on drugs, but he started to get off them. So he ended up going to this retreat led by a Vietnamese Zen master. His name was Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you may be familiar with him. And Thich Nhat Hanh was offering a retreat to veterans of war to help heal the wounds of war. So Claudia Shin Thomas went there and he had a powerful experience. He met other vets just like him who had experienced so much violence, were drug addicted and homeless, and they began to clean themselves up. Claudia Shin started to develop a meditation practice. This was a turning point in his life. When he got done with the retreat, he enrolled into a rehab. He really just started to clean himself up and to really begin to meditate more. And then he met this other American Zen teacher named Bernie Glassman, who runs what's called the Zen Peacemaker Order. And he started sitting with this group, and he got really into the meditation, and then he decided he wanted to become a Buddhist monk, and he asked Bernie Glassman if he could do this. And Bernie Glassman said, I will ordain you, but because of your history, I'm going to ordain you in a very unique place. Bernie Glassman also conducts retreats in Europe to help heal the wounds of wars in different places, including Auschwitz. And so they brought him to Auschwitz in Poland, the concentration camp. And they ordained him on the train platform. This was the same platform when people would come off the trains and the German soldiers would point either to the crematoriums or to the work camps. It was on that platform that Claudia Shin Thomas was ordained as a monk. And Claudia Shin Thomas has a little bit of a sense of humor, and he said, I took a left and I began to walk. And I walked overland from Auschwitz in Poland to Saigon in Vietnam. He said it took me 1.5 years to walk from Auschwitz to Saigon in Vietnam. And he said along the way I would go and I would tell anyone that would listen to me, what is it like to have killed so many men, women, and children? To help prevent wars to happen again. To this day, Claudia Shin Thomas travels to war zones, to prisons, to places where there's a lot of violence. And he's this little white guy in shaved head and robes, like what the heck does he know about anything? And then he opens up his mouth and everyone gets quiet very quickly. And so this is a very dramatic story, but I tell this in the sense that he's now become a guardian of the world, a protector of the world. He understands all the pain that he's caused to others, and the only way that he survives and makes it up is by saying that peace is the only way. That's how you pay it back, by putting an end to the violence. And he gets that deeply, and this is how he can survive and flourish. So this making peace to those I've heard is a very powerful practice of reconciliation. And again, as practitioners of mindfulness and meditation, as we learn to sit with ourselves, we begin to see, honestly, wow, places where I've been hard on myself, places where, yeah, I don't like to admit this, but I've caused some pain to another. and to begin to make those amends, begin to understand one's own conditioning that led to that, and beginning to make peace, becoming a protector of the world. So I mentioned 3 ways that I think are primary in this sense of making peace with mindfulness and reconciliation. The first, to the times I've been hard on myself. The second, to the times I've hurt others. And the third is beginning to make peace for those that have hurt me. This is also a very challenging area, making peace to those that hurt me. And there's 2 ways that I feel are very helpful in working with this part of reconciliation. The first is the recognition that so long as I continue to carry resentment or grudges, ill will towards another, I continue to suffer. Have you ever noticed that? When you're feeling angry about another person, feeling resentful, holding grudges, who's suffering here? We might be pointing the finger out, this person hurt me, but I'm continuing to hold these grudges and resentments, and that's affecting our own well-being. So in the spirit of that, if we do want to have more well-being, can we begin to neutralize the resentments that we're harboring inside us? It's too painful of a toll to take on ourselves, is to carry around these extra bags and burdens and chains of resentment and grudges. The second part that I think is very helpful from the mindfulness perspective as well is the recognition that just when there's an understanding, just as I have been unskillful and hurt another due to my own woundedness, my own unawareness, due to my own conditioning, so too others that hurt me, it came from their own unawareness, their own fears, their own conditioning. And even though it doesn't excuse those actions, perhaps it brings some greater understanding. Yes, those that hurt me, they came from their woundedness, their own fears, their own unawareness. And again, that carrying of resentment and grudges is like a poison to our own heart. We can't be happy if we're harboring resentment and grudges. Can we begin to neutralize them? This is again another very powerful story that I'll share with you. About a little bit over a year ago, my wife and I were in Bogota, Colombia, and we were teaching a meditation retreat there. And before the retreat, our host wanted to bring us to this exhibit in downtown Bogota. And she didn't mention about what it was really about. So we come to this building, and how to explain it, it's like there was like an old building that must have been there at one point. And when you look in, there's like the outer structure of that building is still there. But inside that structure is a brand new building made of glass and just a big black floor and white walls. So you walk in, there's like an old kind of like ruined outer shell, and inside is this new building, mostly of glass, a black floor, and white walls, and a roof. And I'm kind of wondering why is she bringing us here and what's going on? But we walk in silence, and then there's a little plaque that starts to begin to explain what this is. And then there's actually a video in another room from the artist. This is an art exhibit explaining about this project. So what this is called Fragmentos, and it's by the artist Doris Solicido. This is again in Bogota, Colombia. And what this is that when there was a peace conflict a peace treaty some years ago, because there was like over 50 years of conflict in Colombia with a lot of different militia, insurgent groups and so forth, and of course the narcotics of cocaine, because coca grows natural there. It's a lot of conflict for over 50 years. I have a good friend that grew up there, and she's always talking about as a child, like there being bombings and different things, and it's very powerful to live in a country. Like I was talking with my friends there, like when they park their cars at a parking lot, everybody backs in. And at one point I said, why do you always back in? Can't you just drive straight into the parking space? He goes, no, we always back in because we don't know if we have to get out quick. That's just part of their mindset, living in a country that has had so much violence. But so we walk into this building, this art exhibit, and then I start reading, and it turns out that there was a peace treaty signed some years ago, and part of that peace treaty is that they invited the different militia and narcotic groups and guerrilla groups to donate their guns as a sign of making peace. And so as it turns out, 18,000 guns were donated for this project, and they were all melted. And there's a film showing all these guns being donated, and they're being melted. And then they were actually poured into thin black sheets, about 1 meter square. That was the floor we were walking on. It was made of all these guns that were melted down. And what's more powerful was that the artist invited all of these women, Colombian women, to come, and part of this is these sheets were put on tables and they had to be pounded in a certain type of way, and then they would be faceted to the cement floor. And the women that were pounding those sheets, the artist had invited particularly women who had been sexually violated or tortured or hurt during the 50 years of conflict. And they were the ones that pounded the cement, that pounded those sheets from the guns. And they were interviewing many women, and so I watched the interview and the video, and many of them, they were crying and banging and banging. A number of them saying, I can't live with this hate anymore. I can't live with this resentment anymore. This resentment has made me sick. This hate has ruined my life. And it was so powerful to see these women pounding and pounding and pounding these sheets made of guns, and to begin to heal some of their wounds of the grudges and resentments that they've harbored for so many years. At the end, you could see the women crying together, laughing together, holding each other together and saying, I'm no longer going to carry this in my heart. It's too great of a burden to bear. Making peace even to those that have hurt me. Very, very difficult. But in the sense that so long as we continue to harbor these types of resentments and grudges, we continue to, it's suffering inside us. I think we all know the experience of the pain of resentment or grudges. Making peace, the beginning of this healing work of beginning to make peace to those that hurt me. It's not easy. There's a beautiful saying that hatred never ceases by hatred. Only love ceases hatred. And so there's beautiful teachings of the heart. And as we practice mindfulness, how can we begin to make peace to the times I've been hard on myself, to the times I've hurt others, to the times that others have hurt me? Making peace, this art of reconciliation. And to me, this is one of the most important things that we can do in life, is to begin to make peace. And this is how the wars begin to end. It's beginning to make peace. And when you think about it, with this identity that we've developed, like, again, we weren't born hating others. We weren't born with prejudice. We weren't born with bias. We weren't born with racism. This was learned through ignorance. It starts individually, and then it goes collectively, and then it goes systemically, and it develops as part of our systems. But as we become aware, we can begin to see through these systems, see through these collectiveness, see through our own individual biases and racism, places where we've separated, where we sometimes use this word othering. There's me and you, there's us and them.